You've seen the images over the past few days from around the nation and overnight here in Boston. And as bad as they are, and despite what some people in high places are telling you, they are the vocal, violent minority. For every one person setting fires or looting, thousands of others have marched peacefully, calling for justice in the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor before him, Ahmaud Arbery before her, and so many others before all of them. And while the president appears to be fanning the flames, which we'll get to a little later, this afternoon during a vigil at the site where George Floyd died 1 week ago, his brother called for peace.
If I'm not over here messing up my community, come on. Then what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all.
Here in Boston, Mayor Marty Walsh called for calm as well.
We heard young people speaking from the heart. We saw faith leaders providing wisdom and guidance. We saw all kinds of people who simply want to put an end to racism and make positive change in our country. I don't want anything to take away from what they accomplished and the impact that they had yesterday. What happened in downtown after the protest ended was an attack on those values. And it was an attack on our city and its people.
Suffolk County DA Rachel Rollins also called the violence unacceptable, but underscored the main message of most protesters.
This burning rage that you are seeing when you turn your TV on or you hear in my voice is real. People are fed up. And to the white community that is now waking up to see this rage, we have been telling you this forever. We have been saying this since Colin Kaepernick took a knee. We have been saying this for decades, and you didn't listen to us. You didn't care until you saw a video. People are disgusted and outraged, and they should be. And it is completely ironic to have to say to you, please don't be violent. Please keep your voice down. Please be silent and comply with all of the police's requirements, when in fact it's those very people that murder us with impunity. But that's where we are right now. Buildings can be fixed. There are lives that were stolen and people that were lynched and murdered, and they are never coming back. I hope that you take a minute to reflect what a terrible, terrible situation we are experiencing right now.
I'm joined now by former Massachusetts Public Safety Secretary and Suffolk County Sheriff Andrea Cabral, and Michael Curry, former president of the Boston NAACP, now chair of the National NAACP Advocacy and Policy Committee. Michael and Andrea, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Andrea, starting with you, George Floyd was killed a week ago. We've seen intense reaction in virtually every corner of the country, but we've seen that before. Are we experiencing a moment or a movement?
I'm not sure that it's a binary choice like that. I think that this has a lot of layers to it. And I do sense something a little bit different about the reaction to this, but I'm cautious in as much as George Floyd is the latest person to be executed brazenly and in broad daylight. And the fact that we've had this conversation as many times as we've had it indicates to me that while there is a possibility that there will be some policy-based change going forward and that there may be other changes, it's entirely possible to me that there will not be. And that has much more to do with the basic infrastructure that protects at all costs the system that allowed George Floyd to be killed the way he was killed.
I want to return to that, but Michael, I want to continue with this theme. You're old enough, we're both old enough, to have lived through many George Floyds. Earlier today, Ayanna Pressley was on a radio show. She was mentioning the Freedom Riders, and much of what they were saying is exactly what's being said today about the very same thing. So is this different, or is it just all on a loop?
Yeah, I don't know if it's different. In fact, and to Andrea's point, I don't know if it's a binary choice either. I do say, for me personally, I thought that when Tamir Rice was murdered, when that 12-year-old boy was shot in a park in Cleveland, that would be a tipping point. I thought every white person in this country could see a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun like we all did and say that would be a movement and a change. And it didn't. So I do think we run the risk of being angry, being upset. We need white America to step up. We need the policy folks. Now, we know there's some stubbornness on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, that they ignore this stuff in large part. We need Democrats who say that they care about social justice, who care about Black lives, to really show up and, as D.A. Rollins said, to have character and courage in this moment.
Yeah, but Andrea, the few, and I want to emphasize, despite what some of my colleagues in the media focused on, the few who looted and destroyed property and things like that, did they help to undercut the ability to bring the rest of the country on board here?
My first response to that is, who did the looting and who triggered the violence? So within
what's the answer?
Well, within that small minority, there's a much, much smaller minority of people doing those things who were people of color. There are documented instances all over social media of white protesters. I'm not sure that they were actually protesters. I think there's a great deal of evidence that there was an organized effort across the country by white nationalists to infiltrate these protests and to start this. There were many, many, many instances where the police instigated the violence into an otherwise peaceful protest and immediately went to tear gas and immediately went to arresting people and beating people. So for me, the problem is what is the pictures that are put on television are part of a conscious, if not very deliberate effort to indicate to people that their choices are the anarchy of looting or turning a blind eye to police violence. If there's a binary choice that's being put before people today, that's the choice, and it's a false choice. It's an inaccurate choice, but that's exactly how the protests are being defined by looting. They weren't defined by looting. They were defined by the number of peaceful protests that got no coverage.
Should I not have brought it up, Andrea? Michael, should I not have brought it up with you, Andrea?
Oh, no.
Am I contributing to that?
Well, I think that the fact that you asked me the question gave me the opportunity to answer it. So I appreciate it.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Michael, I interrupted you. Take it away.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I've been trying to speak to this as much as possible. So one is, and I would agree with anyone who say a majority of those folks who are protesting across the country are nonviolent protesters. But I want to remind people of the movie Do the Right Thing and Radio Raheem, right? I want to remind them of the anger in that movie that resulted in violence, Black violence, against the oppression that we feel. I've felt like throwing chairs and something through a window. I don't think that that's abnormal. I think it's American. I say it's as American as apple pie. It is the Boston's righteous mob in the American Revolution. It's those white Southerners who were protesting Northern rule and the elimination of slavery. You go throughout history and you can see white males using protesting and mob and riots. In fact, the NAACP was born out of a riot, the Springfield Race Riot of 1908, that they tore up a town and ran out Black citizens. So I say this, that don't be surprised that if you ignore people's oppression, if you ignore their pleas to address their grievances, and you kill them, do not be surprised if it does result in violence. Violence begets violence. Not all the time. Not everybody will buy into that. But we shouldn't be surprised by that. There are some angry brothers I know who are angry, and their anger is showing up on the streets right now. Aside from the fact that there are some people who are perpetrating and feeding this violence for their own purposes.
And as Rollins said today, we can fix the property. You can't fix the life that was taken away. Michael, I want to stay with you. Every time we have a discussion like this on the radio, and I make the mistake of saying to Andrea Cabral, can you help us figure out how to contribute to a solution. And Andrea, if I get this wrong, I know you'll correct me. Andrea says, I'm not going to sit here and tell white people how to help fix the problem that they created. Is she right?
Yeah, I think she's right. I think if maybe a little disagreement with Andrea, I think black folks have been trying to tell white folks how to fix this problem for a long time, right? One of the ways to fix it is consciousness. White Americans shock me because they don't know American history. So it is disturbing that they don't know the history of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, and they avoid having a conversation about it. I think that if they understood the history, then they would understand the imperative and the importance of changing our criminal justice system. If they knew that policing and its roots in slavery, that police officers since my childhood perpetrated crimes in neighborhoods like Roxbury and got away with it, and that my generation grew up seeing police abuse black citizens, then we can have a conversation about how to change it. But white folks generally have not wanted to accept that truth, so then we can't get to the solution.
But, you know, just staying on that first. Oh, go ahead, Andrea. I'm sorry.
No, I want to say, really, the comment that you were referring to, my response to you, what I actually said was, it's not my job to manage your feelings around race. Mm-hmm. And that was said in the context of something will happen, a death of an unarmed black person, a murder of an unarmed black person. And you know, this was particular to Marjorie asking a question about, you know, shouldn't we feel better if we're making a few steps of progress? And you know, and the reason I had that response to her was, listen, black people should not have the burden of experiencing the trauma over centuries of time and the burden of managing how white people reconcile their guilt around that or their feelings. You have to do some of the work yourself. And until that happens, we're not going to get anywhere near where we need to be in terms of addressing institutional racism.
But do you agree? You know, you know, Michael said a minute ago that the fact that we don't understand the history of oppression in this country, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Michael, but inhibits our ability to fix it. But it seems to me, and I can't disagree with that, however, Andrea, it seems to me that even if you know nothing about this history, if you see a cop with his knee on the neck of a man to the point where he passes out and dies under that knee, if you see a little kid, a teenager, a young teenager in Cleveland shot in a matter of seconds, Tamir Rice, by the cops, if you're a human being who cares for other human beings, why isn't that enough for so many people here?
Because you can see that, but if you don't understand its full historical context, you will accept explanations for it that simply don't make any sense in the context of that. And you will never be able to see how institutional that kind of behavior is. And actually, to your point, that's why we keep having the same conversation over and over and over again, because people use them as one-offs. It's that particular officer. It's just a few bad apples. It is not. It is institutionalized terrorism of black people, which has been happening since slavery, but mostly since Reconstruction, when the prospect of freed blacks was terrifying to white people in this country. And it still is.
You know, you're both the themes that you're both touching on are very similar to one of the lines from James Baldwin is being quoted a lot in the last few days when he talks about us living with a very willful ignorance, I think were his words. And in light of that, let me play for you a couple of seconds of what the president had to say on a conference call today with the nation's governors. Here's Donald Trump.
What happened in the state of Minnesota, they were electric stuff all over the world. It got so bad a few nights ago that the people wouldn't have minded an occupying force. I wish we had an occupying force in there. What went on last night in Los Angeles with the stores and the storefronts is terrible. No domination. You have to dominate.
You have to dominate. He called the governors weak. He called them jerks. He called protesters terrorists. Andrea, based on the look in your face, let me start with you. Can this be fixed in a country where 40%, give or take a little, of the people support that kind of approach to this kind of a crisis?
It depends entirely, as to Michael's point, as to what white people in the power structure, along with people of color in the power structure, how determined they are to put those fixes in place. I mean, this sort of 40% that people talk about, clearly, according to polls, those are his numbers. I don't know why we bother listening to him on anything, particularly issues like this. A man who turned off the lights in the White House and went into his bunker, what was going on. It's a waste of time to even cover him and talk about him, his ideas, whatever they are. People of good intention, people of empathy, people of color who are suffering this, there has to just be a very determined focus to reform the systems that enable all of what we are seeing today. It's the systems, the policies. And if we can do that, then we can move the country forward. We've always gone forward a few steps, but we end up going a few steps back every other election or so, I would say.
Michael, last question for you. So on one hand, we have the president making those comments. On the other hand, we have the Minneapolis police chief being asked about the 3 officers who were there for the killing of Floyd, but who have not been charged. Here he is.
Being silent or not intervening, to me, you're complicit. So I don't see a level of distinction.
Is that what America wants to hear? Are they ready to hear that, Michael?
Yeah, I believe they are, Jim. I use the term that we've been gaslighted. We can see something for our own eyes. We can see a man shot in the back. We can see a young boy killed. And then the criminal justice system tells us it's not what you thought it was. There was a fertile movement. There was a confusion, a mistake. What that police chief is saying to us is, no, it was what you thought it was. And we are going to call that out and terminate officers on the spot when we see that they've done something that does not comply with our practices, our accepted practices.
Michael Curry, thank you, and Andrea Cabral as well.